What person from history's death do you wish happened 5 years later than it did? Epstein. I wish he could have ratted on everyone. As much as we hated the guy, Stephen Hawking should have seen the image of the black hole, plus anything that may be identified as part of the James Webb Telescope, especially info on dark matter. Adolf Hitler, he deserved to be stripped of his power, tried for his crimes, made to testify, and finally executed. The world would be a better place if we had video footage of him sniveling and crying on the stand like the little beach imsure he was. What he deserved to see was a Soviet flag flying from the Reichstag, his death camps dismantled, and the victims freed. Hell, we could made him sign Germany's surrender in the same train wagon where the armistice and France's surrender were signed. That would have been a nice twist of the knife. Leave the evil cunt spirit completely broken along with everything he tried to build. Unfortunately, the bastard was smart enough to destroy the train car before anyone had a chance. Compagnie wagon. Abraham Lincoln. He might have gotten Reconstruction to work. I'm surprised this isn't the number one answer. The civil rights movement might not even have been necessary if Reconstruction had actually been implemented. I feel like it would have been interesting to see how music would have changed had they died. 2 young people not died. Mozart is the obvious choice. But Schubert and Beethoven also were pushing classical music and probably would have done way crazier stuff had they not died. I've heard similar stuff about Bizet and Prokofiev, but I am not so sure. In rock music, Jimi Hendrix was in talks to do something with Emerson, Lake and Palmer when he died. Help would have been fun to hear. Also, rumor has it that Buddy Holly was starting to work on more boundary pushing, experimental stuff when he died in the 1950s. Robert Johnson is also an interesting what if. I wish Buddy Holly hadn't died so young. My dog. Bit selfish, but she was truly the goodest girl. My wife's mother raised 5 girls as a single parent in the rural Philippines, and only through her grit, hustle, and sheer willpower molded all of them into upstanding members of their community and college graduates. Her husband took a job in Saudi Arabia and didn't come home for 13 years. So my wife only met her dad when she was 12. His family resented my wife's family because he had sent money back to my wife's mum instead of them, and treated my wife, her sisters, and her mum horribly. A few years after he left, he cut all communication and stopped sending any money back to them. They became very poor, and it would have been easy for her to tell her kids to drop out and work to make money instead of contributing their education. He returned years later as an abusive asshole, promptly squandered all the money he had earned, had an affair and fricked off with his mistress, who left him when she realized he was broke. My wife's mum never looked back or lamented, though it must have been incredibly difficult. She cooked food to sell at the school cantina, farmed and sold the produce at the market, and generally just hustled her ass off to provide enough for her oldest daughter to go through dental school. Her kids became a dentist, pharmacist, restaurant and bar owner, a corporate employee, and an autism therapist. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years before I met my wife, but damn, I wish I could have shaken her hand and embraced her. You have the best answer here. Archimedes. Some believe he was on the verge of discovering calculus that could have advanced civilization by a couple of thousand years. If Kennedy died in 68 instead of 63, the U.S. probably would have avoided a hell of a lot of bullshit that didn't need to happen, which left lasting implications all the way up until now. It is infuriating that bad decisions made before we were even born by men who are now long dead is still affecting us decades later and probably will continue to affect the generations that come after us. Emperor Aurelian. Imagine what he could have done with another 5 years. I literally came here to comment this, with No Way Home still fresh in my mind. Stanley. That man really deserved to see Endgame and No Way Home. Julius Caesar. A Parthian campaign would have been epic, good or bad for Rome. Heath Ledger. Chadwick Boseman. I think 5 more years of his career would have been major. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. Might not have World War I or World War II. Mozart. 5 more years of his music would be amazing. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It was incredibly selfish of her to remain on the bench in 2012. Stephen Breyer is pulling the same shoot now. Phil Hartman. Troy McClure, you may remember me from Francisco I. Madero, Mexican president. His death marked the start of a violent period in Mexican history, with different generals fighting for the presidency, often assassinating the previous one and thwarting the possibility of a peaceful and prosperous Mexico. Mexico and its people have been robbed of peace, stability and justice for far too long. My mother-in-law, I wish she would have been able to meet her grandson. She died 6 months before he was born. She was an amazing woman and she deserved to see him grow up. I know just how you feel. My grandfather passed just over a year before my daughter was born. I wish he was still around to meet his great-granddaughter. Lincoln is the obvious choice, but I'll say JFK. I think he would have handled Vietnam and the social justice issues of the time way better than Johnson. Yup, Andrew Johnson taking over Reconstruction is responsible for so many of today's issues. Stephen Hawking died in 2018. We had the first picture of black hole a year later. Patrice O'Neill. Patrice is a legend. My favorite comedian ever. Him and Bernie Mac. Ching Han, an artist that passed away due to stage IV fibrosis sarcoma cancer. She had the most beautiful and illuminating artwork I have ever seen someone produce. And to know that it was taken away by cancer. Frick cancer. Damn, that was sad. I remember seeing her last Instagram post of her basically weeping and telling everyone she is terminally ill and she's likely to die in the next few months. Then the next day she was dead. Henry V. The 100 Years' War probably would have ended in an English victory 20 years early. This would have prevented the Wars of the Roses and the rise of kings such as Richard III and Henry VIII. And going to say this one preemptively, David Attenborough, whenever he dies, I'll wish he had another 5 years. Ayrton Senna. On the one hand, his death was instrumental to pushing safety standards in motorsport to where it is now. And while he was a big advocate of safety himself while he was alive, I have no doubt we would not be where we are now. That said, he was a great that truly was lost before his time. And it would have been impressive to see what he could have accomplished on track, and just how far he could have gone. He very well could have beaten Schumacher and Hamilton's records of 7 world championships. Not only that though, he was an amazing person who gave a lot of philanthropy, hope, and inspiration to Brazil at a time when they didn't have much else. He had a lot of power there, and with another 5 years he could have done even more. Franz Ferdinand would have succeeded his uncle if he lived another 5 years. He was more sympathetic to the Balkans and notoriously feuded with the warmongering staff whispering in his uncle's ear. World War I as we know it could have been avoided. No Russian Revolution. No Red Wall. No Communist China or NK. No German reparations leading to the rise of Hitler. No nonsensical borders drawn up in the Middle East by England and France that led to the instability and Islamic extremism we see today in the Middle East. Although who knows what would be different now without the world powers learning the lessons from those 2 world wars. World War I was happening with or without Franz Ferdinand. I wonder if Freddie Mercury still being alive would have affected Kurt Cobain's suicide at all. George Carlin. He would have had so much material to work with. Martin Luther King Jr. Paul Wellstone. Edit. He opposed the Patriot Act when it was generally considered political suicide, but he made his case and could have won re-election in 2002. I genuinely think this would have fundamentally changed the political landscape in the lead up to the Iraq War. Robert Kennedy. We get out of Vietnam nearly 4 years earlier. No enemies list. No Watergate. No war on drugs. A president who actually believes in racial equality during the upheaval of the late 60s. Kissinger doesn't get to guide US foreign policy and commit war crimes. This is my answer too. His assassination is a major turning point in you. Fred Hampton, activist assassinated by the FBI, was big into progressive movements and trying to bring everyone together and attempting to stop Chicago gang violence. Robin Williams. He was the one actor that, no matter what role he played, could make it sincerely funny. He was the person I wanted to be when I got older. It broke me when my parents told me that he had died. Freddie Mercury. If he had gotten the meds in time he'd maybe be still with us today. Alexander the Great. He might have gotten the sense to consolidate his empire had he lived 5 more years. Perhaps he also would have chosen an heir. Greek culture would have flourished so much more and the world would have been quite a different place if not for the chaos that followed his death. Stevie Ray Vaughan. Man, that guy made some good music. Wish he would have had the time to make more. Bruce Lee. Terry Pratchett. but with a stipulation that his Alzheimer's also starts 5 years later. So many stories left unfinished. Any child, young children dying and babies hurt a lot more than any other type of person. Sardar Vallabhai Patel, the original father of India, the man who congregated India. Real Chad. Chester Bennington. One of the only artists I would really want to experience live. Chester was going to be my first choice. Considering it's going to be 5 years since he died, he would have to live and possibly die during the COVID era. He had his own demons to fight. COVID would just pile up on top of that. Might be controversial, but people from the last 5 years would be a no to me. And I lost a lot of people I personally care. Nikola Tesla probably. I wish Albert Einstein would have lived 5 more years. We'll never know what he said to that nurse or what he was working on. Jack Layton, the leader of the Canadian New Democratic Party, who died in 2011 just a few months after leading the NDP to become the official opposition party for the first time ever. He was universally respected, and his death left a gaping hole in Canadian politics that has been impossible to fill. John Candy. I think he had several more good movies to make. Kintaro Miura. 2 more chapters of Berserk would have been nice. Sir Terry Pratchett. With the caveat that his embuggerance, as he called it, would be at least stopped at the point it was at the end of 2014/2015. Even as diminished as he was at the end. I would have loved to hear his take on the last 5 years of world history. I also would have loved the chance to at least write him a letter. He is the reason I am the way I am. Grew up on Tiffany aching. And I have yet to be able to bring myself to read Shepherd's Crown. There are 30 some odd other books to read first, before there are no other parts of the disc to explore. New Sir Terry, I hope you knew how many people you inspired and empowered with your words, world, and stories. Fred Rogers. Hell, we could do with having him here today. Tupac. He had so much more to give to the world. Jimmy Savile. So I could kick frick out of him. Betty White. If this thread started a few hours later, this would have been top comment. I scrolled quite a ways to see this. Hitler. To see him tried and executed. Ataturk's death. Anthony Bourdain. Seconding other people here. Abraham Lincoln. His VP was a white supremacist who vetoed a lot of civil rights bills. So if we'd had Lincoln in the whole time for his second term, it could have made a world of difference for the country. Honestly, I'm not convinced that Kennedy living longer would have been a big improvement. Lyndon Johnson was far better at passing bills, and he used Kennedy's death as the catalyst to whip votes for the Civil Rights Act. Anthony Bourdain. I thoroughly enjoyed everything he did. I also choose this dead guy's wife. Jeff Buckley was a day from recording his second album when he died. Would have really liked to hear the finished product. Would have been interesting to see how the Fast and Furious movies would have been with Mr. Walker. Jinnah. I am Indian. If Jinnah had been alive, he could have made Pakistan secular, like Ataturk did for Turkey. His immediate death after partition allowed bigots to ascend to power and Pakistan discarded secularism. If only Pakistan was secular, we'd have a neighbor who we can actually enjoy a better relationship with, like we do with Bangladesh.